Okay, so what if a critique from like 2,000 years ago wasn't just ancient history, but was actually a direct commentary on what's happening today? We're about to dive into a text that makes exactly that provocative claim. It's a pretty challenging perspective, for sure, and our goal here is to just unpack the argument exactly as it's presented.
And there it is. That's the central claim of the source material we're looking at. The author doesn't beat around the bush at all, right? They draw a straight, unbroken line from an ancient group to a modern one. So you have to wonder, how do they build that case? How do you even construct an argument like that? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to follow their logic step by step and really look at the specific accusations, the evidence they pull out, and the bigger worldview that holds this whole critique together. So the whole thing really kicks off by drawing these parallels in behavior. In this first part, we're going to look at the specific actions the author says modern leaders are doing, actions they claim are a direct echo of their ancient counterparts.
And wow, these accusations are not vague. The text points to four really specific things. First, exalting themselves, on their pulpits. Second, putting this huge focus on tithing, on money, while at the same time saying the Torah, the foundational law, is void. Third, this idea of slaughter without mercy, which points to a kind of deep spiritual harm. And finally, using the threat of hell as their main tool for control.
And here's the supposed result of all that. According to the source, these behaviors don't just mislead people, they actually block them from spiritual truth. It paints this picture of a really righteous-looking outside that's hiding a totally opposite reality on the inside. Now, to back up these really strong claims, the author doesn't point to modern examples. Instead, they turn to ancient scripture, digging into passages from the book of Matthew. Let's take a look at the actual verses they use to build their case. The first piece of evidence they use is this incredibly harsh quote. Serpents, brood of adders, and it references the judgment of Gehenna, which is an ancient term for a place of divine punishment. By pulling this quote, the author is borrowing some of the most severe language you can find to frame their critique, suggesting the situation today is just as serious. This next quote hits that theme we just talked about, that contrast between how things look on the outside versus what's really going on inside. The author uses this verse to argue that a shiny, righteous facade can be masking what they call hypocrisy and lawlessness. And this third quote is so important to their argument. It's all about getting bogged down in the tiny, minor rules, like tithing spices, while completely ignoring what the text calls the weightier matters, justice, compassion, belief. The source uses this to draw a modern parallel, a focus on superficial stuff over the core principles. Now, these critiques aren't just about calling out individual behaviors. The author uses them to frame something way bigger, like a cosmic conflict. The source presents this world that's divided into two totally different spiritual kingdoms, and each one operates under its own set of rules. And when you see them side by side, the contrast is, well, it's pretty stark. On one side, you've got what the text calls the adversary's kingdom. It's defined by self-interest, control, destruction. It loves misery and craves attention. And then on the other side, you have the Creator's kingdom, which this text defines by radical equality and sharing, a place where the least important person is treated like the most important, and everyone gets the same reward. So, if one kingdom is built on taking and controlling, what's the alternative built on? Well, the author proposes this single foundational idea that they call the law of the kingdom. And this is it. This is the core principle that the source proposes. It's a simple idea, but it's also pretty profound. Any spiritual gift or blessing given to one person is actually meant for the entire community. In this view, there's no such thing as private ownership of spiritual gain. It's all communal, meant to be shared with everybody, no exceptions. And to back this idea up, the author once again goes back to scripture. This quote is from a story about King David, where he declares that the soldiers who fought on the front lines and the ones who stayed behind to guard the supplies should get the exact same reward. The logic is simple. Everybody played their part, so everybody shares in their reward equally. And here's the kicker. The source argues this wasn't just a one-time decision David made. It was set up as a permanent law, a right ruling that was supposed to define the nature of this kingdom from that moment on. So all of this brings us to this key definition that really ties the whole argument together. According to this text, a kingdom law isn't just a rule you follow. It's more like the fundamental operating system for a spiritual reality. It's the one principle that decides if a system is built on selfishness or on sharing everything. And that leaves us with one last big thought to consider. The whole argument we've just unpacked really hangs on this one idea, that a single, foundational law can define the entire nature of a community, or a leader, or even a whole spiritual reality. So the question the source leaves us with is, what does that really mean?